Hi, everyone. This is Joseph Ness, Cantor Joseph Ness, and we are going to have a little chat about the music of Salamoni Rossi. And I would like to start out by playing an arrangement of his. It's not really an arrangement, but it's for a larger orchestra by a wonderful composer named Lucas Foss, someone I've worked for. And I'd like you to possibly close your eyes and just listen to these harmonies. This is from one of the Rossi madrigals. In the relatively small area between Rome and Milan, Rome being a little south of Florence and Milan almost in the Alp area right below Switzerland, and between Genoa and Venice, Genoa here, this general area of northern Italy, there was from the 14th through the 16th century a combination of incredible genius and hard work of vitality and versatility, coupled with, and very different from the medieval time, a kind of a universality of aesthetic expression, probably such as the world has never known before or after. This process, this 200-year process, was called the Renaissance, and specifically the Italian Renaissance. It happened that this area at this period would not have been the case a century or two or before, the seat of numerous Jewish communities. And it was a kind of a liberal time, and in the spirit of those times, it was impossible for the Jews not to be affected by and not to contribute in some measure toward the intellectual process of, philosophy, artistic expression, etc. Just to give you a certain example, this is an insanely beautiful fresco in the Palazzo Ducale, which was the palace where the Gonzaga family, a family that ruled that area for some 200 years, had. So this is, one of their palaces in the city of Mantua. Speaking of the city of Mantua, look at the gorgeous, it's incredible art. Speaking of the city of Mantua, this in other settings is the setting for the Verdi opera Rigoletto, the city of exile for Juliet's beloved, and obviously Romeo and Juliet of Shakespeare. And so in the 16th century, we're talking the 1500s now, this city was unrivaled in beauty, also in wealth and sophistication. And this is our hero of this little chat is a gentleman by the name of Salamoni Rossi, and he was born in the city around 1570. So just that you have. By the way, here, this other, well, that's back. Here is another in the Ducal castle, or a combination of castles. These are the gardens that the Gonzaga family had. So it was a very magnificent palace, this place, very artistic. And so at the end of the 15th century, we're talking 100 years before that, there was a Duchess Isabella Gonzaga, and she brought in some of the finest musicians in Italy to Mantua to compose new music and to perform it in front of the royal family and townspeople. In 1588, now we're moving back up 100 years. This is 1588 is when Salamoni Rossi is 18 years old. The city of Mantua has a population of about 250,000 people, with the Jews making up 1/5 of the population, 50,000. So this is a huge Jewish city. So it wasn't easy on them particularly because, obviously it was Europe. So they had taxes levied on them for no other reason than the fact that they were Jews. They were members of a segregated population, certainly, forced to wear a yellow badge as a signifier of who they were, forbidden from a number of areas of employment. But they did have the opportunity, and this is as a result of the Gonzaga family, to mingle with the general population, which is different than other parts of Europe, and specifically Northern Europe. A large part of the partial acceptance of this Jewish community in Mantua was because of one person by the name of Duke Vincenzo I Gonzaga. So this is the latter part of the Gonzaga hierarchy. So this is at the turn of the 17th century, which is the 1600s, brings music to even more magnificent scale. Matter of fact, wait, hold on, 16th century, excuse me, the 1500s, brings music incredibly important by bringing many artists, a lot of Jews, to his court, along with having a court orchestra. He has sculptures, paintings, and other works of art, and he is a real patron of the arts, and maybe one of the great patrons of the arts in all of Italy. This is Vincenzo I Gonzaga. He has a ballet group in the court, and he also imports, as I mentioned, art. This is a piece by Peter Paul Rubens, who also worked in that area at the time. Some of you might know that artist. The Fall of Phaethon, painted 1606, 1608, incredible artist. This is another wonderful painting of him, self-portrait. I assume he's the guy in the middle, well, one of the two guys in the middle, of him, Peter Paul Rubens, and a circle of friends in Mantua. So this is the kind of the cultural milieu that our hero, Salamoni Rossi, not necessarily, well, he grows up in Mantua too, but he's certainly working for this court. He gets paid for what he does. Here are some of his friends. This is one of the great composers of that time, regarded probably as the revolutionary composer who led the transition between the Renaissance and Baroque music. So we're talking about Monteverdi. He was born in 1567, so about 3 years earlier than his friend Rossi, in a place called Cremona, which is in that general area, also the birthplace of one of the most famous violin makers of history, Antonio Stradivarius. So that you might know, and those violins are incredibly expensive. By the way, there's a work, it's a kind of a semi-sacred work, and a collaboration between a number of Rossi's colleagues and himself, by the way. And matter of fact, he and Monteverdi get together to kind of write this thing. It's called La Maddalena. And what's interesting is Monteverdi composes the opening and Rossi composes the closing. And the Monteverdi's opening is the exact same opening, very, very similar, actually. Not exact, but similar to the opening of the prologue of one of his great works, L'Orfeo. And let's, by the way, this is the previous picture. This one is of Monteverdi, and this is of our hero, Salamoni Rossi. What I'm trying to do in this chat is give you the background, and then we go to the synagogue music for which he is known, at least in our circles. So this is the opening to L'Orfeo. One word about it. It involves the audience. The actors are behind the audience. There's a kind of a, the trumpets are behind the audience. The rest of the orchestra is in front. It's an amazing opening. The opening to Orfeo, just let's give it a little listen. This is Monteverdi. And so I believe that was with John Elliott Gardner, if I'm not mistaken, one of the wonderful, it probably was a British production, but wonderful, and a absolute culturally changing opera. Matter of fact, Monteverdi is known as the composer who really, the first one who gets opera into the repertoire. So now this is a first piece of Rossi. We did listen to at the opening to a piece of Rossi's, but this is the first piece of Rossi that would be regarded as a trio sonata. And a trio sonata, I don't want to go that much into it. It's based on a trio of singers. You have the high voice, the middle voice, and the low voice. And what happened over the course of the Renaissance, and specifically at the end, it got transferred from the vocal to the instrumental. Let's listen to a little of this. It's beautiful, beautiful music. And this is the Rossi we don't know. And I wanted to give you some of that Rossi, just to give you a taste of it. It's really wonderful. If I can find that arrow. Here we go. And that music is called Fairy Queen music, or excuse me, Fairy Consort music. And you'll notice, and unfortunately in these chats, we have to move on. We can't listen to the whole pieces because we'll be here for 5 hours, and I'm more than happy to do that, but I'm not sure you are. By the way, I just want to introduce you to a couple of other, three other of his colleagues. This is Rossi, who worked with these people on a daily basis as court composers in the Gonzaga court. Giovanni Gastoldi is a wonderful, wonderful composer and one of the great madrigal composers of the time. I'm going to give you just a short little madrigal of his. This is called, let me just give you the text. Come all ye armed, my hardy soldiers, fa la 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 la. I am love indomitable, the righteous archer. Do not fear in the slightest, but in beautiful array, follow me with ardor. So we're not talking about an army here. We're talking about, a Cupid with his bow and arrow. Just listen to this. This is wonderful, wonderful music. and the choir is fabulous. This is a madrigal for five, very short. Okay. By the way, that was called Amor Vittorioso, which means love victorious. And these one of these fabulous madrigals. These that actually, you know, I've heard this performed by a number of ensembles, including high school choirs too. But it's fabulous to hear the real. This was an Italian group, and you can really tell the difference. The language just sparkles. There's another friend, colleague of his called Gyashes de Wert, D-E-W-E-R-T, one of the leading composers developing also the style of the late Renaissance madrigal, but not in this happy way. He's a wonderful and great composer, I think, one of the most influential of the late 16th century madrigal composers. And by the way, particularly, he was an influence on the music of Claudio Monteverdi, which is fascinating. His later music was very important for the development of music in the early Baroque era. So let me just tell you, he's married. His wife has an affair, and she has an affair with a guy named Bonvicino, who was another composer in the area. So when the affair was discovered, and as a matter of fact, in 1570, when our hero Salamoni Rossi was born, she runs away to another town, and then, you know, he's obviously heartbroken by the thing. But this is a little bit of gossip. But so when she returns back to home, she becomes involved with another guy, and then she takes a plot to murder his uncle on the death of his father, and it's all very complicated. I'm already lost. I'm not going to go further than about that. But I want you to listen to this madrigal. I'm going to give you the text. It's unbelievable. And this talks about his life situation with his wife. O you who takes with you part of me and leaves the other, either take the one or give back the other, or kill both the same time. Stay, stop your steps. At least let our voices be the last link. I do not speak of kisses. Another might be more worthy of yours. What do you fear if you remain, O evil one? You could deny since you were able to flee. It's really a story of his wife's affair. But just listen to this. It is so. I want you to listen to the flow of the music. Sometimes it gets incredibly upset, mad, and sometimes it gets sad. It's just a cornucopia of feelings. Unbelievable music. This is with a graph, so it's going to be fun. By the way, for sonata is madman. Gridava means the madman who is yelling. And it will have the text on top, so you can follow that. Here it comes. So you can see it's for five voices. Purple, green, orange, a little less orange, and yellow. So you can see this is not really tonal music. It's what it would be called modal music. And I'm not going to explain that, but tonal music comes in the latter part of the Baroque era. We'll talk about that another time, maybe. But there's another composer who uses what is called figured bass, and his name is Viandana. And he writes some beautiful music too. We don't have time to listen to his music, but these composers, I think I mentioned four other composers, were working on a daily, monthly, yearly basis as fellow court composers with Salamoni Rossi. Why do I want to bring this up? Because when we listen to his synagogue music, it's beautiful, and we will talk about that. But I want you to get the cultural milieu, at least from the non-Jewish side that he comes out of, because he's a real person, So we move on. By the way, this is, oh, wait, hold on. I'm sorry about that. Al Naharot Bavel is from his published Jewish music. You'll notice this is his writing, and you'll notice that the notes don't look like they do now. On top of that, this is a choral piece, and I believe it's a 4-part choral piece, 4 or 5 part. But in those times, there were very few scores. Scores meaning that you would see tenor, bass, soprano, alto, tenor, bass. What they did was they kind of wrote it out, and then they only gave the parts out. Now, the reason being is because they wouldn't have to spend as much money giving big scores to people. By the way, I have another quip about that. I know that in the first part, in the Catskill times, and maybe in the first part of this, and maybe we should do a Catskills talk. I think we'll do that too. But when they had all those choirs, cantorial choirs, a lot of the people that wrote and conducted the music would only give one part out. This has nothing to do with Rossi, by the way. Would give one part out to, tenor part to tenor, the bass part to bass, and they wouldn't give the score. Why? Because they wouldn't want another conductor to take the music and do it. Well, anyway. Okay, so that's for me very interesting. This is the Renaissance nomenclature of music. It's just that you know that. You'll notice there's no bar lines also to speak of. Because there was more of an improvised feel to the thing. The sense of one note being 3 times as long as the other, they had a different sense of that. And we could talk about that another time. I just want to now play another piece of Rossi. This is Rossi. And what's beautiful about this is, and what he really tries to do in his instrumental music, and he writes a lot of it, by the way, a lot of it, is that he's a great violinist, really great violinist. And what he does in these so-called trio sonatas, and he's one of the first people that writes these kind of trio sonatas, and I've mentioned it just a few minutes ago, a trio sonata comes out of a trio of singers, but now they put it into instruments. So, but what he does is, if you'll notice the first violin part, which is very hard, a lot of notes in it, and so Rossi is responsible for developing in the trio sonata that kind of bravura playing in the upper instruments. Again, you have the 2 violins and the cello. And by one other thing, the cello plays an ostinato, at first very slow, and it's a long one, but the whole piece is based on that, I think, 12 measure or so ostinato in the cello. And it keeps repeating, and the violins just improvise over him. Here we go. We won't do the whole piece, but give it a listen. Well, I guess I played the whole thing. So beautiful. By the way, this is part a canto. This is not a Jewish piece, but this is one of Rossi's publications. If you look on the bottom there, that it says Salamoni Rossi right there. So he writes an introduction to it, and again, you'll notice the music is of that style. You know, without bar lines, that kind of thing. Where are we going here? Okay. What I want to do now is play maybe one of the two last pieces of non-synagogal music. This is published in Venice in 1613. It's a really, really, really beautiful piece. It's called Volo ne tue begli occhi. I want to show you, these are two women. The reason why I'm going to show you this is because both women play instruments and both sing absolutely beautifully. And just let's give this a listen, and we will move on. Okay, while originally that for about 100 years, starting in the middle of the 16th century, I get mixed up with the numbers. There was an active Jewish theater group in Mantua, known as the Università Israelitica. These citizens of Mantua, they were all Jews, actually, you know, in this theater group. Everybody knew that their schedule. So on Fridays, the performances would not be held in the afternoon because of Shabbat coming in the evening. And they would be open for the citizens of Mantua, the non-Jews, to come in to see these plays. So originally they were devised for the Jewish population, but as I said, it was so popular that the non-Jews decided to come in on it. They were very successful. There was a wonderful playwright, mainly one Leone Somo, and there was a choreographer and other theater people. The theater composer, this specific group, was Salamoni Rossi. So in Mantua in that time, Jews achieved a real remarkable synthesis between their Jewish culture and that of their secular environment, which was very unusual. It was one of a very rare period where absorption into the civilization did not affect Jewish intellectual life. They had many rabbis, writers, and astronomers, physicians. It was everybody who was Jewish, who was either a rabbi or an astronomer or whatever they did, they kept their religion. The Hebrew language was revived in Mantua, used in poetry, literature, and even in spoken conversation. This has directly to do with the Renaissance period. So in that context, it's not surprising to see that the Jews were involved in all areas of Renaissance life. There were Jews that were musicians. There was a gentleman by the name of Abromo del Arpa, which is Abraham, the harp player. His nephew, Abramino del Arpa, obviously the nephew, the harp player. There was a guy by the name of Isicino Massarano, forgive my pronunciation in Italian. He was a singer, dancer, a lutenist, and also a composer. By the way, Salamoni Rossi had a sister. Her name was Madama Europa, and she was a very sought after soprano. She has a son who is a composer, and it's a whole line of musicians. So basically, Salamoni Rossi works in that court between 1587 until 1628. And he's totally, that work that he does there is for the Christian community, not the Jewish, but the Christian at the court. But at the same time, here's a man who proudly puts his last name as Salamoni Rossi Hebreo. And this is, everybody knows it. Salamoni Rossi, the Jew. So his descendants are from, the family name is Me Ha'adumim, which means from the red. It's a very proud family, and as a matter of fact, his grandfather may have been Jewish. His grandfather may have been a rabbi. And so he writes a lot of non-Jewish stuff. And I want to, as a last example of non-Jewish stuff, because this is stunning music, the colors are astounding. And this is Salamoni Rossi at his best as far as the non-Jewish secular music. This is like a symphony. It is called Sinfonia de Gagliarda detta Narciso. Listen to the colors. We're going to move on because I could listen to this music all day. It's so pretty. Okay. This is where Rossi's probably most daring compositions occur. And that is that he writes these, this is a group of 33, I believe, 33 pieces that he writes just for synagogue use. And there were instruments were not allowed in synagogues because of the tradition of the Holy Temple being destroyed, and the other problem with Jewish music making is they're so much involved. Their lives are in the communities that are not Jewish, but they don't want their music to be influenced by the non-Jewish traditions. So they're kind of isolated in making their own kind of music. Change was totally frowned upon. Prayer tunes were kept in their original form, and no harmonization was allowed. But again, we're talking about the Renaissance period. And so there was a...
Sorry, I don't understand.
Oh, God. My phone. Jews were, in the Renaissance, developing a taste for the modern. So they began to question why the music of their synagogue should begin to sound so old-fashioned. And that's the interesting dilemma that has carried through the ages, I think. But interesting that it was in the Renaissance period. So as early as 1476, Hebrew works have been printed in Mantua. But it wasn't until 1623, Salamoni Rossi is in his 50s, that his fame really solidifies with a publication in 1623 of a book called Shir Hashirim Asher Shlomo, which is a collection of 33 psalms, hymns, and other liturgical poems set for combinations from 3 to 8 voices and intended for use on festive synagogue occasions. So this 33 Songs of Solomon, Hashirim Asher Shlomo, becomes the first composed songs to be published in Hebrew. He has a friend, a kind of a mentor, Rabbi Leon of Modena also. Rabbi Leon issues this kind of proclamation that in 1605, after years of prohibition, provided halachically derived material for performance of choral work in the synagogue. Modena's own choir in his synagogue in Ferrara, which is a neighboring town, seems to have established a precedent. So the songs, let's just go to this, the next, this is a beautiful Psalm 121 of Rossi, and it's an Israeli choir. This is from his book. By the way, there's such beautiful music. This is a picture of his sister, obviously somewhat of a beautiful woman, one of the main sopranos in Mantua, singing opera and the rest of it. I want to move on because we're getting late here. Al Naharot Bavel. This is that piece that I showed you in the Renaissance music script. Let's listen to it. These are also an Israeli group. Psalm 137, the text, by the rivers of Babylon, we sat down and cried as we remembered Zion, our holy city. Answer us, our King, answer us by the rivers of Babylon. Psalm 137, I believe, verse 1.
Al
And that was, I believe that was the whole Psalm 138. Um, okay. The enforced segregation that they had in Mantua culminated in Duke Vincentio's one, Gonzaga. He had to make a barricaded ghetto because the Jews were in danger from the population outside. So Italian Jews were forced to to turn inward for their mode of expression. Now their appetites for new music would have to be satisfied within the confines of their own community, which means the synagogue would provide the venue for this art. And that allows our hero in this story, Salamoni Rossi, to write all this music for the synagogue. So, by the way, in Padua, and Ferrara, these are towns fairly close to Mantua, there were synagogue choirs at the end of the 16th century, at the end of the 1500s. In Modena, there was an organ, fascinating. In Venice, they had a complete orchestra. And what I mean by complete orchestra, we're talking about some strings, it could be a couple of cellos, so we're not talking about Richard Strauss, 120 piece orchestra. But it was an orchestra, a Baroque orchestra. These practices came under heavy criticism from many conservative members of the Jewish community. Rabbi Leone of Modena, who is a colleague of Rossi, writes the following: "We have among us some connoisseurs of the science of singing, 6 or 8 knowledgeable persons from the community. We raise our voices on the festivals and sing songs of praise in the synagogue to honor God with compositions of vocal harmony. A man stood up to chase us away, saying that it is not right to do so because it is forbidden to rejoice, the destruction of the temple, and that the singing of hymns and praises in harmony is forbidden, as I mentioned before. Although the congregation clearly enjoyed our singing," this is back, the rabbi writes, "this man rose against us and condemned us publicly saying that we had sinned before God." But the Renaissance, the energy from that time was so strong that a number of rabbis in those communities defended what Leona of Modena did in terms of singing of the choir. And Rabbi Leona continues to write, "I do not see how anyone with a brain in his skull could cast any doubt on the propriety of praising God in song in the synagogue on special Shabbatot and on festivals. Such music is as much a religious obligation as that which is performed to bring joy to the bridegroom and bride, whom it is our duty to adorn and gladden with all manner of rejoicing. No intelligent person, no scholar ever thought of forbidding the use of the greatest possible beauty of voice in praising God. Blessed be he. Nor the use of musical art which awakens the soul to his glory." So Rossi is the first Jewish musician to compose, perform, and publish polyphonic settings of the synagogue liturgy for mixed choir. So in the preface to his publication of synagogue music, this is what Rossi writes, and we're almost done. From the time, by the way, this is the Norsa synagogue in Modena, excuse me, in Mantua, and was built in 1515. Norsa is the Jewish businessman who built it. But anyway, this is the synagogue where Rossi probably had some of his stuff done. It's obviously remodeled in the early part of the 20th century, but this is the structure. So here's what Rossi writes. From the time that the Lord God first opened my ears and granted me the power to understand and to teach the science of music, I have used this wisdom to compose many songs. Out of the many ideas within me, my soul has delighted to take the choicest of all as an offering of the voice wherewith to give thanks to him who rides upon the heavens with a sound of gladsome thanksgiving. For we have been given voices so that we may honor the Lord. We have been given voices so that we may honor the Lord, each with the blessings of talent that we were given to enjoy. The Lord has been my strength, and he has put new songs into my mouth. This is Rossi writing. Inspired, I wove these into an arrangement of sweet sounds, and I designated them for items of rejoicing on the holy festivals. I did not restrain my lips, but ever increased my striving to enhance the Psalms of David, King of Israel, until I set many of them and shaped them into proper harmonic form so that they would have greater stature for discriminating ears. And he ends, since it was the Lord who granted me the artistic spirit to recognize beauty, it is to him that I have raised my voice in service. I felt it would be proper to benefit the congregation by publishing a selection of my motets, which I composed not for my own glory, but for the glory of my Father in heaven, who created this soul within me. Therefore, I will give thanks to him evermore. Which I have to say is slightly similar to what Bach says about his music. So this is fascinating. But we end this little talk with an Adon Olam. I was trying to get a more of a visual thing that you could see people singing, but this will show you the score. There was another composer in Renaissance by the name of Gabrieli, and he would write music for antiphonal choirs, as many of them did. But in the 20th century, there have been a lot of arrangements for brass ensembles. And actually, he wrote for brass ensembles too, where you have on one side of the room one brass ensemble and one for the other. Sometimes there are as many as 4 or 5 different areas, so you get this kind of stereophonic kind of feel from different places, answering and antiphonal stuff. So let's just look at this. Is an 8-part. This is Adon Olam for 2 choirs, and you'll see how they match with each other, and then we'll end with a couple of words and we'll be done. Okay, Adon Olam. Watch the score. It's not going to be hard. That's not what you're going to read. Here we go. That's the second choir. gorgeous music. I'm just hoping you all take from this that there is more to a composer like this than just listening to one kind of his music. One educates the other. I have so much more love for the synagogal music that I know some of his other music to back. I see what he does. I watch the various techniques he uses in the other pieces to inform the synagogal music too. So this is a real person, a real musician, one that I hope that we can, over the next years when this whole surreal time of the world is over, that we can really make some wonderful music from. By the way, he probably was murdered in 1630. There was that ghetto was ravaged by Austrian troops, and probably his sister too. All trace of Rossi disappears. About 200 years later, Baron Edmund de Rothschild, on a trip to Italy, stumbles on a strange collection of old music books, and bearing the name of Rossi Hebreo. He hands the music over to a friend of his, Samuel Naumburg, who's a wonderful Jewish composer and cantor in his own right, cantor of the Great Synagogue in Paris. And Naumburg, rightly so, publishes the version of the Rossi music. To end, I will say that I did a bunch of research this week. Various places. I want to say that I looked into a wonderful article by Joshua Jacobson, who I've got a lot of information from, and other sources. My lecture next week is going to be called "The Translation of Psalms," and I think it's going to be one of my best ones. I have a lot of great ideas with some awesome music. So we will end with this little 1-minute piece from the Rossi suite. Again, as we started out with this that slow piece. This is a little quicker. Here we go. Thank you so much all for coming. If there's any questions, open your microphones. Hello?
Thank you, Joseph. This was beautiful.
Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Really appreciate it.
Joseph, thank you.
And she was wonderful.
There's a lot of music to listen to and to learn and to be together and celebrate with, but we obviously have to wait a little.
That Adorno alone is just gorgeous. Just beautiful.
I have to say that if one thing I want you to get out of this is that there's other, this is a real musician, not just writing for the synagogue, but a real musician, and his other music informs his synagogue writing, really does. And so now when I listen to the synagogue music, I go, wow, that's it's an organism. It's not just one half. So that's what I'd like you to come up with.
Hi there. Greetings from Israel. I just took a piggyback on this when I saw it was going on, and I enjoyed it immensely. Thank you very much indeed.
Wait, who is that?
My name is David. I'm from Israel, and I like Chazanot, and I just saw this, so I took a piggyback on it, and, as they say. And so thanks very much. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here.
Doesn't sound like he comes from Israel.
By the way, just
been here 40 years.
I'm going to say again, the next week, and I'm already working on it, is called the Translation of Psalms. That's the title. And I have some awesome music on that. And so, we're going to basically, I want to take a text like Psalm 150 and show you how different composers approach the text and stuff. I think it'll be really fun. And after that, we might go to more Gershwin. I don't know. Who knows?
Yay.
I have no
Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you, Joseph.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Joseph, thank you.
very much.
Our first time on, but definitely not our last. Good to see you.
Wonderful. Thank you all for being here.